There wasn't much that a Jedi feared. Whenever there was a great threat to the galaxy, they were the saviors in need who stood against it. For Jedi Padawans, there was the trial of courage for good reason, in which they had to prove their ability to remain calm even in the greatest danger and confrontation with the darkest forces, and never lose hope. That was one of the greatest strengths of the Jedi. They faced even their greatest adversaries, the Sith, face to face. But in galactic history, there was one species, one creature, that snuffed out any hope, any chance for the Jedi to win the fight. No Jedi who faced it survived. It was far more dangerous than anything we know from the films and series, so much so that Master Yoda even made the decision to erase any trace of its existence from galactic history. Even in the Jedi archives, no record of it can be found. The creatures in question had many names, including Sri Karai, which translates to Eaters of the Force. Ironically, they were most often called the Nameless. They came from a planet called Za in wild space. They first made a name for themselves during the time of the High Republic, which began about 500 years before the Battle of Yavin. Beautiful jewel-like eggs suddenly appeared out of nowhere, from which they eventually hatched. When they hatched, they were initially small, sludge-like larvae that had to quickly find food to take form. The form of very large humanoids with 4 legs and 3 long claws per leg that twitched uncontrollably with movement. They had a long, fibrous tail and a broad head with tentacles around their mouth, an image that, if you ask us, extremely reminds one of Cthulhu. Their skin was extremely pale and they had red or blue glowing eyes. How they looked was only a side note. Where it really gets interesting is in their effect on Force sensitives. Most Jedi couldn't even see the true form of the creature. When a Nameless was nearby, Jedi would usually begin to hallucinate. They quickly fell into delusions. The reality as they knew it no longer existed. The type of hallucination was different for each Jedi. Some saw giant monsters, others simply darkness with thousands of eyes and sharp teeth. Still others saw cosmic Lovecraftian horror that can't even begin to be put into words. The resulting fear clouded the affected Jedi's senses and could even completely sever their connection to the Force in some cases. In actual combat against the creatures, they were completely powerless, and when the Nameless had their prey in their clutches, they used their tentacles to pull the living Force out of their body. Nothing remained but a gray, calcified husk, frozen in an eternal final scream. Sometimes a Nameless didn't even have to actively suck the Force out of a Jedi. It could also just be nearby to slowly but surely draw the Force out of the victim. In this case, the Jedi began to age incredibly fast until the body simply stopped functioning. At an even greater distance, the effect became more subtle. The Jedi's perception darkened in the Force, and at the edges of their consciousness, a feeling of fear, exhaustion, and subtle panic spread. It was a slow process. Here and there, they would have brief episodes in which they experienced only pure terror and had no connection to the Force or even to reality. Sometimes this state lasted for hours. The Jedi's fear made them, if you will, tastier to the creatures. Now we come to the reason why they did all this. The answer is that they had something in common with Darth Nihilus. Like him, they had an insatiable, almost desperate hunger that they could never fully satisfy. For this reason, they always absorbed as much as they could and fed not only on the Force energy of their victims, but also on their fear. However, they could be controlled with special artifacts. We'll only name the artifacts now and not explain them in detail, as that would go too far. There was the Rod of Aram and the Rod of Daybreak. When combined, you had the Rod of Power, and with it, you could control these beings. Remember that, it will be important later. And now that we have an overview, let's get specific. What exactly happened with these beings, and why did Yoda delete them from the archives? The entire story of the origin of these beings is extremely detailed. We'll give a brief summary. It all began when a smuggler handed over a mysterious egg to Alicia Zeveron. She was the leader, also called Mother, of a religious cult called the Path of the Open Hand. This cult believed that anyone who could use the Force, including the Jedi, was extremely dangerous by nature. There shouldn't be such a thing as Force users because their power entitled them to elevate themselves above other beings. Therefore, they revered the Nameless as the great equalizers of the galaxy. By destroying Force sensitives, the Nameless would make the galaxy a place of equality, a place where no one could elevate themselves above others because they possessed incredible powers. They believed that the Sri Karai were tools of balance, and whoever possessed the Rod of Power would control them as guardians of balance. The goal of the Path of the Open Hand was thus to find the two components of the Rod of Power to control the Nameless and unleash them on the Jedi again. And at least the last part, Unleashing the beast on the Jedi happened earlier than planned. Two cultists who wanted to overthrow the mother broke open the egg and forced the creature to hatch somewhat early. This all happened in the holy city of Jeddah. There, the situation escalated and it became a real battle. Why would be too complicated to explain now, as you'd be missing a lot of context, so we'll just leave it at the fact that a battle took place on Jeddah. As a consequence, several things happened. First, the cultists managed to get the Rod of Daybreak, which they combined with the Rod of Aram, resulting in the Rod of Power. With it, they could finally control their beast. They did so and commanded it, among other things, to kill Jedi Master Liban. After this battle, the next station for the cultists was the planet Za, the homeworld of the Nameless, naturally with the goal of finding more of the dangerous creatures and using them for their purpose. The Jedi pursued them there, and the conflict ended in a great battle, a moment that went down in galactic history as the Night of Sorrow. In this battle, an immense number of Jedi lost their lives. But here comes a twist. The creatures also turned against some of the cultists because some of them were actually Force-sensitive. The Mother was the best example of this. She secretly wanted to use her followers only to increase her own power. Other Force-sensitive cultists knew of their gift but clearly decided against using it, as that would violate their ideals. And then there were those who didn't even know they were Force-sensitive. No matter what applied to the respective cultist, the Nameless didn't care. For them, it made no difference. A cultist named Marta was quite disturbed by how the Nameless cruelly killed the Force-sensitive cultists. When she then found out that the Mother had basically just been using them all, she ended the battle with a large explosion. This triggered a flood in which all the Nameless drowned, except for one, the original one that had hatched from the egg on Jeddah. She used it to punish the Mother for her betrayal with death, or as she put it, she freed the Force from her control. With the last remaining Nameless and as the last member of the Path of the Open Hand, Marta swore revenge on the Jedi. Her ideals remained unchanged. However, she was unable to actually carry out the revenge on the Jedi during her lifetime. During the battle, the Rod of Power broke again into its original two components, and she only possessed one of them. She couldn't really control the last Nameless. Nevertheless, she took it with her, took care of it, and even fed it Jedi here and there. After the catastrophe on Exar, Yoda and his advisors came to a decision. They deleted all records of the Nameless from all sources they could find, including the Jedi archives, so that no one would learn of their existence and get the idea to use them against the Jedi. And at least partially, that was a wise move. We have here a species of beings that killed virtually every Jedi who crossed their path. Not even Darth Vader had such a high success rate. In the wrong hands, this knowledge could wipe out the entire order. But it came at the price that future generations of Jedi would be completely unprepared should they ever be confronted with such a being again. Therefore, some believe that the Grand Master had made a fatal mistake here, because eventually the Nameless actually returned even during Yoda's lifetime. Decades later, it began when the last Nameless reappeared. It was frozen in a scream beneath the planetary surface of Rustern, where it was regularly visited by Marta's descendants who took care of it. For 150 years, it was in the ice until something strange happened. Jedi increasingly had nightmarish visions of the creature's return, visions full of fear, panic, and chaos. Meanwhile, a descendant of the Roe family, who had controlled the Nameless for a long time, staged a terrorist attack to distract the Jedi so that he could then thaw the Nameless and unleash it on the Jedi again. The creature's first victim was the legendary Jedi Master Loden Greatstorm. Seeing such a great Jedi turn to stone, terrified to death, shocked the other Jedi to the core. Together with the Nihil, who had staged the terrorist attack, Roe managed to obtain more Nameless eggs, 7 in total. Now the time had come for a larger attack, a heavy blow to the heart of the Republic and the Jedi. They would release the Nameless on Starlight Beacon. Starlight Beacon was a Republic space station where many Jedi were also located. More than that, it was also a symbol of hope and peace. The Nihil prepared the attack by shutting down the station's security systems and power. Those on board were now on their own. The creatures raged on the space station while the trapped Jedi were extinguished one after another. No rescue was possible for Starlight Beacon, and Yoda was forced to witness the consequences of his mistake years earlier. However, the Nihil realized they were playing with a power they didn't understand. Roe, on the other hand, loved the power he suddenly had in his hands so much that he eventually went insane, a madness that had accumulated over generations. Finally, however, the Nihil were outwitted and defeated. Roe himself disappeared again deep into the galaxy, leaving the rest of the Nameless imprisoned and hungry. Since then, they've only been waiting to be unleashed on the Jedi again. Thus, they became legend, the subject of children's rhymes and old ghost stories told over generations. Young Jedi even exchanged stories about the Nameless during Dooku's Padawan days. He once mentioned to Ventress that he had never believed them, unaware that these terrifying creatures actually existed.